Chapter 2.4, Sculpture Part 3. We're into carving. That's where we left off. And we were looking at Michelangelo, and then we looked at a Hawaiian figure that was carved out of wood. This piece, I know it kind of looks wood-like, but it's actually stone. I do believe it's laminated stone, if you can see that line there. And it does almost have a wood grain, but this is green hornet stone. It has some interesting sort of texture and pattern in here. So this is carved. It's 3 feet high, 5 feet wide, and then the depth is probably about 29 inches at the Tate. Henry Moore was a big figure in mid-20th century sculpture and in art in general. So stone can be carved abstractly. We did look at some realistic and also more descriptive figurative pieces. Remember, I think I mentioned live rock carving with Egyptians. They do things similar to this with a full pharaoh or goddess carved out of the stone. But this is called live rock carving. This is a mountain that is made out of stone. There's big deposits of solid rock in various parts of the world. This is in South Dakota. So this is Mount Rushmore. You've probably heard of that. The National Memorial was carved out of solid solid granite in the mid 20th century. It was finished in 1941, if you look down here. And it was very difficult to find a suitable spot. If you look at all these veins coming through all this rock, a lot of these things can create cracks with the differences in stone or differences in pressures of the stone. Sometimes it'll create cracks. There was a fair amount of cracking and difficulty in carving this piece. There were some adjustments made because as they were carving it, they were using dynamite and machine tools and being very aggressive about the carving, and it created some structural problems, but they did manage to finish this. This is just an amazing piece. You can see some of the dynamite blasting, those sort of tube-looking marks there, and you'll see that on the side of the road if you go through a mountain pass that's rocky. You'll see some of that as well. Sticks of dynamite are put into drilled holes and then they're blown out. So this is carved, live rock, very massive. It's one of the largest and most famous sculpted portraits in the world. And he had to look for the right kind of carving stone. Modeling is a different form of working. It's an additive process, so we're switching gears here. An artist builds up the work by adding material. Some materials, such as clay or wax, require a skeletal structure. Now, they're not always done that way. An armature is used at times. It's usually for something that's kind of large. If it's small enough, you just model and smush clay around and sculpt wax, and you're carving into it a little bit, but you're mostly mushing it around and modeling it. Modeling is when you're mushing things around with your fingers, if that makes sense. So when clay is dried and fired in a kiln, it becomes hard and durable, but that's not always how clay sculptures happen. It's a little complicated. So this one, when we're looking at this is a fired clay piece. This is terracotta, and this is from 520 BC, so this is 2,500 years old. And this is an Etruscan piece, sarcophagus from Cerveteri. So this is a tomb piece. This is for putting into their tomb, and it's cut up into different segments so it will fit into a kiln and be fired. And these figures are hollow so that they are able to be put in the kiln and not explode. You can't fire solid clay, with some exceptions, but you can't fire it that way. Her arm is separate and so on. It's very well preserved, very stylized. It isn't individualized like the Romans were later, and the Egyptians do this also, where they put portraiture onto the faces. That's not the case with the Etruscans, but it's a beautiful terracotta piece. And it's four separate large pieces. We can kind of see where those lines were. And they're enjoying an Etruscan banquet. The couple are enjoying their banquet in the afterlife. Casting is another process. It's similar to modeling, or I would say modeling happens in the beginning of it. So it says first a model of the final sculpture is made. So you're going to use either the wax or the clay. More often it's wax. It's a specialized type of wax that kind of needs to be heated to be moved around and to be sculpted. Then the wax is going to be put into a, I'm going to skip ahead because it's hard to explain. So the wax is put into a, um, a structure, and then there's a mold put around it, right? Then the mold is heated and the wax burns away. So we're going to back up here. So those are seven steps. This is an armature. We talked about that a moment ago. Armature covered with either clay or wax, but in this case we're in a wax casting, lost wax. The wax covers the wood. Okay, so now we're going to build up on it. We're going to finish it up. This is our finished wax sculpture. Then this blue sort of material with these joints, those are plaster, or that is a plaster mold. It's not exactly plaster, it's a special recipe put around the entire um, sculpture out of wax. Then it's put into a kiln. You can see the heat here symbolized. And then it's melted out. Like all the wood and all of the wax burns away and melts out. Okay, so and this is not actual, this is kind of goofy, but it would be flipped upside down, and you would actually pour this bucket of hot molten bronze. I want to say it's about 1800 degrees, depending on the formula. And then you would pour it in, and it would go through all the different areas. And it needs little air vents here so that it, like a milk jug when you're pouring it, if you don't have an air sort of passage, the handle serves as an air passage to let the air come back out. It kind of gets stuck. So the air vents are here, then it cools, and then we break off, remember our blue mold here, our blue mold out of plaster and sand, it's called investment, and then that is broken off, and we have a bronze piece. Now this is deceiving because there's a lot of work to be done still. There's a lot of rough areas, and there's a seam all along here where the mold is joined, and then somebody comes in with a grinder and cleans it up. Okay, but what we're looking at is an ancient bronze, and there are no grinders and there are no power tools. This is 2,400 years old. We're looking at BC. This is the rice warrior, and this is a beautiful piece from the that was discovered in the sea, in the ocean, in the Mediterranean. And the reason it exists is because it was part of a shipwreck. Everything from the Roman era and the Greek era were melted down during wartime later, and nothing existed to show the beautiful sculpture that was made at that time. Priorities changed, and this survived because it was in a seagoing vessel, and the vessel sank. So it's a fine example of lost wax method. It was discovered in 1970.